I always tell my clients these large liquidity events can either be dynamite that blows your family apart or glue that holds your family together.
Rob Wolford has seen both outcomes up close, but it's what he said next that makes even high performers pause.
We've all got a gap between what we want and what we have. The smaller your gap, the wealthier you are.
Not richer, wealthier. That's the tension. Money expands options, but it also expands exposure to ego, to noise, and to urgency dressed up as opportunity. After decades advising families through exits and windfalls, Rob is blunt about what he's fighting right now.
You've got FOMO, which is closely related to this other horrific emotion, which is envy.
And it shows up most when people can finally afford to chase anything. And in a world where speed is the default, where even AI can hand you an answer instantly, judgment still isn't downloadable. So pour something simple, pull up a chair at the bar, and listen in as Rob Wolford and I dig in on what actually holds families together after a win, and what quietly pulls them apart.
What are we cheersing to professionally? I know all about Hollencrest. I know your background. I know that's a fantastic organization, and you guys are building something pretty special.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started building this organization 26 and a half years ago.
Man.
I kind of blinked, and now we'll be celebrating our 27th year in April. And longevity matters, just like your business. We're all about building something that is sustainable, that will withstand not only the challenges of time, but also different market environments.
Absolutely.
And in my world, we've seen a lot in the last 27 years, the dot-com bubble, the great financial crisis, onset of COVID, some volatility this year that you might remember surrounding the tariff policy in the spring. And it's funny because I've been sharing with clients that 2026 has kind of been like, I have a home in the Northwest, as you know, up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Right.
We get 4 seasons there.
That's right.
And I've used this metaphor that 2026 has been like living in the Northwest, where each quarter has given us kind of a different feel.
Okay.
We had a lot of volatility and angst in Q1.
Yeah.
We got, a breath of relief and hope in Q2.
Sure.
We had a blast in Q3, and then Q4 returned us to volatility and uncertainty. So
I get it.
It's about surviving and adapting, and that's what you have to do in life, and that's what you have to do in business.
Amazing. Well, before we dig too much into Hollencrest and your style and how you've built such a successful practice over those 26 years, let's take it back a couple steps and let's talk about, a bit younger Rob Wolford, right? And
back when I was skinny, is that what you meant?
But no, in reality, everything in our past shapes who we are today and where we've come from. And for example, I always laugh because I kind of worked my way through college as a bartender, and I loved having that experience because it taught me to engage with people at a different level, and it taught you how to get yelled at, and it taught you how to have thick skin, and it taught you how to have these types of engagements that ultimately shape you. So tell me about some experiences, either growing up or maybe even a job that you had before you were a titan of the wealth management industry, of course, that kind of shaped where you are today.
It's funny that you mentioned bartending because I worked in a restaurant and I was initially a busboy, and I realized you're at the mercy of the waitress or waiter you're supporting. And sometimes that isn't pleasant. So I had an opportunity to go out front of the restaurant and be the valet parker, where I was all on my own. And I've had a lifelong obsession with cars. So for me to get paid to park cars was pretty much the greatest thing in the world. But prior to that,
I won't ask you what your starting salary was.
It was tips, even better. Tips back in the good old days. So you talk about bartending. And if I go back a few years prior to me working in the restaurant world, where I wasn't 16 and able to do that. My first serious job was acting as a caddy at the local golf club.
Wonderful.
And I was maniacally obsessed with saving money to buy a car when I turned 16. So I would ride my bike every day to the country club. And on Saturdays and Sundays, I'd do a round in the morning with 2 bags and a round in the afternoon with 2 bags. And I'd do that again on Sunday if I did it on Saturday. And what was interesting is I didn't really realize it at the time, but I had this very up close and personal exposure to a lot of successful people who are golfing. And I got to see how successful people act. I got to learn when to listen and when to talk. I got to just get a better sense of how to conduct myself, maybe. And then, of course, not lost on me was the fact that I had calluses on my shoulders from carrying bags.
Oh, man.
And it connected the dots between effort and outcome. You know,
Sure.
that was hard work.
Yeah, well said.
But I had a car when I was 16. And so I like to work, and that was a good experience.
You know, you mentioned a lot of themes there, right? Like hard work, dedication, forward thinking. I think that one of the values that I try to navigate with my own kids now, and as a dad, you'll understand this, but this idea of like money that you earn, it's just a little bit different, right? Like something that you get to sink your teeth into, and those values that start to come along with that, I think are really important for everyone in life, but understanding that there is something like purpose and value, and those are really important aspects of life.
You'll be in for a big treat the first time one of your sons sees that difference between their gross paycheck and the net paycheck.
Oh, it's already happened.
My daughters are out there in the working world, and the first time one of them got a big bonus at year end and saw that the number going into her account was quite a bit smaller. Yeah. I was like, welcome to my world, sweetheart. Now you know what Dad's been talking about all these years.
Absolutely. My kids are still in the space where, you know, I think a $200 or $300 paycheck becomes a $100 or $200 paycheck rather than an actual real amount. But it's the same thing when you think about it, right? Like it doesn't matter the amount of zeros.
Absolutely.
You learn to value what you put effort into.
Absolutely.
Right? No different than building a business, for example, right? Like I'm sure that as much as you would love to share a success story where you decided you were going to create a wealth management practice, and then overnight it was like, boom, you guys were the best in town and everybody wanted to work with you. It just doesn't happen that way.
I'm always fascinated by the mythology of overnight successes. Man, and people, even they think they're witnessing an overnight success where so-and-so took their company public and now it's gone gangbusters, or they just started it. It's mythology. There's so much work and sacrifice that goes into building something meaningful.
Sure.
And I suppose maybe there's been an overnight success somewhere, but by and large, entrepreneurs, and that's primarily who my client base is, they make great sacrifices.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, their professional success is spectacular, but behind that, there's sacrifices, whether it's on the family level or the health level or the lifestyle level. So I caution people to be blind and to not be blind and believe the overnight success hype.
It's such a good and valuable point. For me, it comes down to one word, and that's balance, right? Like, because balance is so important in life. Just like you, we have clients that have been incredibly, wildly successful, more successful than even they thought they would ever be. And they'll point to things where it's like, but this, but this, right? Like, and then you have other clients that are like, man, I thought I would be in a different place. I thought I'd be further along than I did. But, I took that year abroad and I did that and I went and lived that experience. And, you want to mix that kind of level of responsibility with proactivity, I think, for a lot of people. And you get to see that as yourself, as a family person, as a dad, right? And then maybe unique to your own profession, as a steward of clients.
Well, what's really germane to our conversation today, Josh, is we are constantly studying and evaluating and discussing this concept between being wealthy and having a lot of money. Yeah. And a lot of people think they're the same thing, and they're really not.
Okay.
Having a lot of money can help, but it doesn't make you wealthy.
Sure.
And if you dig a little bit deeper, and this is super applicable to your business as well as mine, I'm a big believer that the wealthiest people in the world, and this is going back to this being my comment, my belief, we've all got a gap between what we want and what we have. Yeah. And the people who are really content with what they have and not obsessing about that which they don't have or that which they want, that's wealth right there. The smaller your gap, the wealthier you are. And by the way, you could have 10 times as much money as I do, but I might be wealthier than you if I'm content with what I've got. And then as a personal sideline here, and we could perhaps spend the whole hour discussing this, but my core value is that the wealthiest people I know, after being in wealth management for 27 years, this is just me, but the wealthiest people I know are those who have traveled the world and experienced different cultures. Because I'm way more fixated on experiences than stuff.
I love it.
And seeing how the rest of the world behaves and getting a sense for the fact that you're pretty damn insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
That's wealth. I know guys who have been to 50, 60, 70 countries.
Yeah.
And I also know guys who have 9-digit bank accounts. And that person who's traveled the world is wealthier, in my opinion.
The word that comes to mind when you're explaining this is perspective, right? So as I mentioned, my kids are 18 and 13, and one's about to go off to college for the first time. And my wife and I have one requirement. We have several requirements, but one of the requirements,
one non-negotiable,
is that, look, we're going to help with college. We're going to help with education. You're going to work and you're going to help as well. But one of the requirements for us is that you study abroad, because that is so important for us. Like you mentioned, experiencing the world, or experiencing what you mentioned is the greatest country in the world, but from an outside perspective. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to go live abroad. I lived in Australia for a couple of years. And what that taught me was to be able to see the United States from an outside perspective. And it really, really shaped a lot of what I did moving forward.
It goes right back to that P word you mentioned, perspective, because you look at our country a little differently when you've been on foreign soil for a 100%. While. And it also makes you more aware and more compassionate. And going back to wealth management, I'm a big believer in humility, being humble. Even when you're winning, stay humble, because that other person next to you, you don't know what they're going through. Even if you're winning and hitting the cover off the ball, you're still better off staying humble, being humble on the journey. And the next door neighbor of humility is empathy. And I think we're in a bad place if you can't be empathetic to other people.
I love that idea of you don't know what the person next to you is going through, right? So you got to be mindful of that. Being empathetic to others, I think, is at the root or at the core of philanthropy, right? Like if we dig into even the Webster dictionary definition of philanthropy, it's really about love for people. And if we keep that at our core of everything that we do in life, we're typically going to have a better lens and approach for working with others.
Way more fulfillment too, by the way.
Talk to me a little bit about personal philanthropy, and when do you remember becoming kind of aware that it's not all about you?
I'm not going to make any bodacious claims and say I was born philanthropist.
Sure.
I think of myself as an accidental philanthropist.
Okay.
Because I was lucky enough maybe 15 to 20 years ago to realize, hey, I've got enough bandwidth to give back and try to make my community better. And at that time, I was invited to go on the board of a very significant charity that focused on men and women serving our country.
Amazing.
Particularly those, at the time, it was all of those serving in Iraq and Afghanistan in either Operation Enduring Freedom or Iraqi Freedom. Yep. And we were a country at war at that time. And I got invited to go on the board of this organization. And what was really interesting is it was like that scene in the old movie Stripes where everyone's going to take a step forward on 3. Right. And I took the step forward when no one else did. And the next thing I knew, I was chairman of the board of this organization. And it was funny because I got back to my office and told my partners, I said, these crazy morons want me to be the chairman of the board.
You're like, hey, by the way, I got a second job.
Yeah, exactly. They want me to be can you believe how crazy these guys are? And my partner said, hey, dude, you're doing it. You can't not do it. And to your point, it became almost like a second full-time job because I think if you're going to do it, you've got to be passionate. You can't be partially engaged to the mission because on the tough days, you're going to want to beat yourself to death with a stapler. So you have to be passionate to get through the hard days. And so I got fully invested in this charity. I was supporting military families during and after deployment. Amazing. So when something's going wrong there, the stakes are a little different than if you're trying to save a field mouse somewhere or whatnot. So I had to be fully engaged because on bad days, these young men and women did bad things to themselves and we were trying to be the safety net. So I learned quickly just how much bigger the world is than any one individual and how insignificant I was. And then the other thing that I learned that was truly magical that paid a dividend I never would have anticipated is I discovered, and this is a bit of advice I give to a lot of people, especially when I was running the charity, I challenge people to find something that you're passionate about, that you care about. Going back to what I said, if you're not passionate, you're not going to get through the tough days.
Absolutely.
Then figure out how much of your time or money you can give to that cause you're passionate about, then give 10 times what you can afford.
Wow.
Because the moment you give 10 times what you can afford, number one, you're no longer hanging onto the side of the pool. You're in the deep end, and that's when stuff happens.
Wow.
And kind of the magic trick here is when you've overcommitted like that, you get the most accomplished.
I love it.
You got to tread water, because if you don't, you sink.
Sure.
And what I learned that proved to be almost like a magic trick, like the David Letterman, stupid pet trick.
Yeah.
You give that much and you've already committed to giving more than you can afford.
Yeah.
You wind up getting back more than you gave.
Of course.
You get so much more back. When I was chairman of the board of Operation Homefront, we're talking 2006 to 2009, my girls were about ages 5 through 9 right then.
Sure.
And there was a 3-year period where every Christmas or Thanksgiving, I had 3 or 4 people who had nowhere to go who were coming over to the Wolford house for family and comfort and security and food. And in the case of Thanksgiving, football.
Sure.
So these young, predominantly men, would come over. And I remember one instance where I had, I think, 4 guys over. And if I added it all up between the 4, they had 6 or 7 prosthetic limbs.
Wow.
And what an amputee does when they get off their prosthetic limb is they want to take their limb off, or their prosthetic off, I should say, and let their stump breathe. Pardon the language, but that's what they call it. They want to get that prosthetic off their leg, let their stump breathe. And so what my daughters would do would take these prosthetic limbs and hide them, and they would start playing the game with these young men and women going, okay, colder, cold, warmer. Okay, you're hot now, you're hot. And I was watching
a picture here, my friend.
I was watching this real time and realizing that my daughters were completely oblivious and blind to the disability of these people. And when you extrapolate that a little bit, it's raising compassionate human beings. And I never thought, hey, I'm going to volunteer for this organization. They're going to make me the chairman of the board. I didn't connect the dots and realize it's going to make my daughters more compassionate and more understanding. That's a dividend that dwarfs everything I did for the organization, because I've got that for the rest of my life. I've got compassionate daughters.
100%. And you can't pay for that. Like, you know what I mean?
It's invaluable.
I'll use the word, it incredibly minimizes the output based on the input that you're then receiving. And to your other point, where you've now encouraged not only, and you've led by example. I know that you've been the first person who gave 10 times the amount they anticipated doing, because you're a walking point kind of guy. You're not going to expect of others what you're not willing to do yourself. I know that about you. But that advice that you gave and that you shared, and that you often tell your clients and colleagues and friends, hey, whatever you were thinking about doing, do 10x that.
Yeah.
We've all had investments, for example, that maybe they didn't perform the way that we thought they were. And you were like, oh man, I would have done something a little bit different like that. I don't know anyone who's given 10x and then at the end of the day been like, man, I shouldn't have done that. I wish I hadn't helped those veterans as much as I did. I wish I hadn't invested as much in
wish I hadn't made such a big difference.
Sure. It's never a regret, right? Like, because every single time you're typically getting more, and not to be cheesy that it's better to give than to receive, right? But it's a reality.
Well, it pays you back on so many different levels, because you get the fulfillment of making the world a better place.
Now you're talking about my favorite word in the world, my friend.
Yeah. We've talked about P words and F words. We're covering all the bases.
Now we're getting into the best ones.
Fulfillment, it is a wonderful thing, because you're making a difference, which makes our communities better. And then as you think more globally, a better community is a better country, which is a better world. But the other thing is it makes us more interesting as human beings, because I remind people we've got to be multifaceted. Nobody wants to talk to me because I know how to build a portfolio, or you because you're one-dimensional. They want to talk to us because we have perspective, and we're just the sum of our experiences. So I love being outside my comfort zone, and that's another speech I make. I challenge people to get outside of their comfort zone. It's when you accomplish the most.
I love this idea of being uncomfortable or comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Comfortably uncomfortable.
Comfortably uncomfortable. It's if we go through life and we only focus on things that we have either been told we're good at or we inherently know that we're good at, we're not going to grow. We're not going to continue to innovate. We're not going to create new solutions. Like we believe at Anonymous Philanthropy, we define philanthropy as the process of solving problems. I think that a lot of people think of philanthropy as writing checks to charities or volunteering. We think that it is truly about solving problems and scale, at scale. Talk to me about this role that you and I play as a trusted advisor for others.
Sure.
We're in a position where we either steward wealth or we help clients navigate an unknown to them. Talk to me a little bit about what it means to navigate something on your own versus now you're responsible for something of others.
So here's an interesting way to reshape the narrative on philanthropy, I think.
Okay.
I tell people it's a privilege.
Yeah,
it's not,
of course,
the fact that you have the ability, maybe as a family, to define what causes are important to you and how to create change and then to implement that. It's a gift. It's an absolute gift. When we counsel families, and oftentimes, as you know, I work with families that have significant liquidity events. So their world might change. They're toiling in the trenches, building a business, and then one day it goes public or one day it gets acquired. And heck, we've even had a client win the lottery once. So liquidity can come in many different ways and shapes and forms. And almost across the board, or I shouldn't say across the board, but my smartest families try to plan for this liquidity or be thoughtful after it happens. Sometimes, you can't plan for a lottery winning, but if it does happen,
I'd like to. That'd be fantastic. If you could teach me how to do that,
that's a different conversation. So if you're fortunate enough to have the kind of wealth that affords you the ability to be philanthropic, then the opportunity exists to be thoughtful and study how to be most effective. Because I always tell my clients, these large liquidity events can either be dynamite that blows your family apart or glue that holds your family together.
Interesting.
And I've seen both outcomes with high net worth families. And one of my beliefs is that if you want to have glue holding your family together, philanthropy is a great tool to bring the family together. And oftentimes we have 3 generations with the patriarch and matriarch, G2, and a bunch of grandkids saying, hey, what's important to us? Are we interested in education? Is it cancer research? Is it the environment? What aligns with our core values as a family? And this is a win-win, Josh, because I think it's good for the family to think about this, and it's good for me as an advisor to get them that way. You just get better outcomes. You ignoring money and your good fortune doesn't usually lead to the best outcome. And it's interesting. You talked about your experience and what Anonymous does. I'm also a big believer in relying on the expertise of the experts. Don't try to be your own brain surgeon. You guys have incredible knowledge and experience and skills and a deep team at all things philanthropy, which is why I like collaborating with you, because I have no interest in learning your trade or reinventing your wheel.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And obviously we feel the same way about the partnership with you and your firm. The idea of expertise and team, I think is really interesting in our space, because I think too many people have this fear of bringing someone else to the table. Right. And it comes from that idea of it's not all about me. Right. But in the moment, sometimes it's hard to say no to things, even when you're not the best resource. And I think that's sometimes a struggle of wealth management, for example, where they're like, hey, we want it. It's always well-intentioned. Don't get me wrong. But that said, sometimes it's hard to walk away from dollars to pick up, walk away from dimes to pick up dollars. So to speak.
One of my secrets in this area is I've made all of my employees owners.
Wow, I love that.
Because if they own part of the firm, owners behave differently than employees. And going back to your comment about feeling threatened or insecure, I learned from reading some pretty well-written books. If you're working for me and you're my junior and we're both employees, I'm thinking, gosh, Josh is really smart. I don't want him to look too good or he might leapfrog me. And I don't necessarily empower Josh. But if you're a business owner, you want to empower those around you and have everyone be the best version of themselves because the organization thrives. And,
Absolutely.
And I always tell my team at work, the pack's bigger than the wolf.
That's
None of us are more important than the organization.
Sure. it's I know you have a great relationship with our founder and CEO, Noah McMahon. And, Noah's philosophy in building the team is that he wants everyone who's working on this team to be spending as much time as possible doing the thing that they're best at, right? And I really believe in that aspect. And what you're mentioning about your team is it really allows for that autonomy and allows for exploration and more risk taking because look, we know that the companies and the individuals that tend to take the most risk end up getting the biggest payoff, right? Sure. But if you find yourself in an environment absent of that ability, you're never going to have that payoff because you're never going to have taken that kind of exploratory leap.
So I'll tell you just how old I am here by this comment. I went to business school in the late 80s. And at that time, we were taught to look in the mirror and do that cold, frank, difficult assessment and say, gosh, Rob, what are you not very good at? Yeah. And then let's say it's accounting and public speaking. Yeah. Well, you better go work on those things you're not very good at. Sure. And that was the school of thought in the late 80s at the best business schools around the country. Yeah. And I'll do a little shout out here for a really smart guy from Stanford named Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Good to Great. And that book changed my life. Wow. Okay. And his basic concept was, hey, don't spend your time trying to become better at that which you're not very good at or even bad at. Go become great at what you're already very good at. Sure. So we have a team of specialists at our firm and want to have a different capacity for every person to be the best at what they do. I coach people all the time. Go find what you're very good at and try to become excellent at it.
This concept of expertise, right, is I've had many people comment to me that sometimes it can get lost on the next generation because of the environment that we're in, whether it's, the social media space or that's always the next thing or just little snippets of things. And there really is a true value in developing a skill set that allows you to be an expert at something, right? Because then you're always going to be in demand. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with being a general practitioner. But, for example, if I'm going to have knee surgery, I want to go to a knee surgeon. Yeah.
Do not YouTube it, okay?
I don't want my general practitioner getting in there and digging around. I want the best results. Sure. So like you at Anonymous, we pride ourselves on our ability to build the right teams to solve the right problems. Just like if you're going to put together a structured portfolio for a client, you're going to want the best of breed solution to solve that problem for that client. Whether it's a tax minimization issue or whether it's a growth related portfolio, you're going to reach out for the absolute best solutions. We do the same thing. Only the difference is we're trying to, solve problems at scale out in the environment. And you're trying to often solve for your clients. So how do you think about this concept of problem solving, both at an individual level for your clients and then maybe in the macro?
I tell my clients when they hire Hollencrest Capital Management, they get the collective experience of our organization. And the fact, if I look at my core management team, I think we could add up the numbers and get pretty close to 200 years of collective experience.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I say, look, we've seen it all and we've seen what works and what doesn't work. And so why don't you rely on us? Doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but if there's 10 obvious landmines in the road, we'll point them out and make sure we don't step on them. So there's no substitute for experience. We also believe in building a dream team. So
I love that.
We're very good at what we do, but I know for all things philanthropy, I'm going to call my friends Josh and Noah. And if I need the best CPA, I've got a short, roster of best of breed CPAs or estate planning attorneys. So always important to build a dream team. And two comments you made, I want to go back to. You talked about expertise and being credible and whatnot. And I want to give you a little gift, which is your 18-year-old son. Pretty soon he's going to go off to college and his perspective is going to change a little bit. And one day he's going to come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas and he's going to say, you know what, Dad, you're pretty damn smart. I have a new appreciation for what you've done. So as kids get to college and then maybe become young adults, they're going to appreciate and recognize how successful you are and how smart you are and how lucky they are for your role model that you set for them. Going back to the dividends you get from philanthropy, I want to make it very clear that I'm here today and can directly trace my journey back to meeting Noah in 2008 while doing philanthropy. So it's a direct path. I would not be here without the philanthropy I did 17, 18 years ago when I met Noah. So that's an example. I'm not kidding. It's like that silly little 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. You know, we could also play that game 6 degrees of separation from Noah McMahon. But I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm sitting here today because of philanthropic work I did 18 years ago where I met Noah.
You mentioned that you work with a lot of entrepreneurs. Let's talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial mindset and how the mind of an entrepreneur tends to work, because I think it's fascinating sometimes when we work with these people that are incredibly intentional about building a business and they've become wildly successful, but sometimes they can be a little bit tougher to coach. What's been your approach in working with entrepreneurs?
So it's interesting. You say those critical words, don't know everything. Oftentimes that entrepreneur will have had such tremendous success in their core business that they get this inflated belief in their capabilities and think, you know, because they're really good at home building, maybe they can go be great at, you know, making semiconductors or, you know, software, you know, as a subscription or something like that. So they sometimes overestimate their skill. I have to be very diplomatic there because I can't say, oh, you got lucky,
what
Josh,
are you doing?
You got lucky. But the reality is, for a successful outcome, think about it. You have to have a great idea. You have to have maniacal execution without fail. You have to have unwavering vision.
I gotta get a notebook here.
You have to have patience. You typically want to be the first mover. And if you stack all these things on top of each other, it still helps to have good luck. You know, luck is a key ingredient. So there's this alchemy of these variables that lead to successful outcomes. And sometimes, you know, going back to the H word that I threw out there, humility, I've got to kind of gently remind Mr. Founder or Mrs. Founder, hey, great outcome, but, you know, lightning doesn't always strike twice. And let's be careful here with our next vision. Because one of the things, going back to the psychology of an entrepreneur, which you initially asked about, they're wired differently. They have this unwavering belief in their own capabilities. They're consumers of knowledge. I don't know any entrepreneurs who don't read and don't want to constantly learn. They're committed to learning. But with that comes this robust sense of self-worth, and sometimes overconfidence in their capabilities. So I've got to reel it in a little bit because, you know, you've often heard the term serial entrepreneur. That's the person. There are some visible serial entrepreneurs. You could look at Elon Musk, wonderful serial entrepreneur, but not every entrepreneur is going to be a serial entrepreneur, but many of them try and they discover the part that lightning doesn't strike twice. So I've got to counsel people, and there's always room to be engaged and have new visions, new ideas. But the balancing act is we can't bet your lifestyle. Sometimes people have a big exit and the following Monday, they want to do their, you know, next version of whatever they did. And I'm like, hey, let's pause here. Let's be thoughtful, slow, and deliberate. And oh, by the way, you're not going to bet your lifestyle on my watch.
We talked a little bit about your personal journey with philanthropy and your heart for working with members of the armed service, which is absolutely incredible. Talk to me, or maybe share a story about a client or a colleague that you've worked with where you've seen that maybe from the outside perspective, because it's one thing experiencing it one-to-one, and then it's another seeing another person have that type of experience or another. I know a lot of your clients are incredibly philanthropic and they're incredibly successful. How have you seen philanthropy or kind of taking an entrepreneurial approach to philanthropy even shape how a client has kind of had that experience?
I just took entrepreneurs to the woodshed for sometimes overestimating their own capabilities. Now I'm going to give them some credit and say entrepreneurs make great philanthropists because they think big. And Noah and I have had this conversation on many occasions. You know, I use the fishing metaphor. Like if you're going fishing and all fish are equally difficult to catch, don't fish for trout, fish for tuna, fish for the big fish, think big. And so entrepreneurs are very good when they become committed to philanthropy. They think big and they don't want to make small changes. So that's where I love that confidence and that passion.
Yeah.
So they think very big, and I've seen entrepreneurs of all shapes and sizes. I was just with one today, a longtime client of mine, who does more than 90% of the entrepreneurs, but he is maniacally obsessed with having nobody know what he does. He's not in it for the credit. Some people want the accolades and they want the dinner and they want to take to,
and that's okay.
Yeah, that's part of their ROI on their philanthropy. This particular client wants nothing in return, no recognition, no awareness of what he does. My business partner also comes to mind, Greg Pelazon, because I watched him get very passionate about private education. And it was a little bit of an accident where he went on the board of the elementary school where his children were attending 25 years ago. The school was in the early stages of building up. They had trailers on site and wanted to build out their facilities. And my partner was able to bring his specialized knowledge of finance to the table and oversaw the issuance of a bond to raise money to build out their facilities. And like me, that was his, stripes moment where all of a sudden he's the next chairman, whether he liked it or not. But it was really interesting because I saw the profound impact he had on education at that one particular school. But then other schools found out what Greg did for that one school. So, just today he was with a school seeking his knowledge on issuing a bond. And so that allowed his expertise to have a amplified effect and impact several private schools here in Orange County. And I'm the son of an educator, public school educator. And I soaked the public school system in California for everything I could. I went to Berkeley undergrad and UCLA. And ironically, none of my 3 daughters went to public colleges. So, and my mom, who was a public educator, is probably rolling over in her grave right now. But education's my core value. I had a rather unstable upbringing and a life ahead of me that didn't really align with what I wanted. And I figured out, you know what? In this land of opportunity, education is my ticket out. Anything's possible, in my opinion, if you're educated, or your chances go up if you're educated. So that was my equalizer.
You actually brought this up, this idea of balance, right? Because when we hear a lot in philanthropy that we need a refreshed scorecard many times, that the measurement within philanthropy needs a rebranding. And I often think about this concept of, it's easy to define success or measurement in other aspects of life. And for example, in sports, we have a score, right? And in business, we have profit, which is a measurement of how successful we're in school. We have grades, right? And in philanthropy, it's not so simple, right? And I think the knee-jerk reaction for most in philanthropy, when you're measuring success, a lot of people default to how much money we gave away, right? Like, so that's like, hey, how much money did I give away? That will then equate to how successful I've been in philanthropy. Now, I can tell you, I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen people who have given away $100 million that have had less impact and far less fulfillment than those that gave away $10 million. So this idea of philanthropy really needing a refreshed scorecard is something that we educate our clients a lot on, which is ultimately about setting the right outcomes. So, for example, you've used both of these words already is the reason I bring this up, but we kind of use the scorecard in philanthropy as 2 measurements. We use impact, right? So impact being what is the measurable result of what we did, right? If I'm going to do this work with the veterans, how many veterans did I impact? And what was the result of that impact on their lives? And we can measure that and we can count it. And that's really important. But there's this whole other side to measuring philanthropy, which is fulfillment or joyfulness, for example, right? And I think those are sometimes intertwined, but that work, that incredible work that we did to impact the lives of those 1,000 combat returning veterans, how did that make you feel?
I mean, the fulfillment is, I was thinking back as I drove over here today. I remember really when I was, neck deep in this mission and when you're serving the military community, like I said, the stakes are a little different. It's easier to measure the connection between action and impact. And I remember several cases, one in particular where a young veteran who was dealing with some PTSD issues in Costa Mesa, and I was working with him quite a bit, trying to be the safety net that he needed. And he called me up one day at my office and just explained to me how he's going to drop his kid off to school. He's going to probably get a cup of Starbucks. He has an errand to do for his wife. And then after that, he's going to kill himself. Yeah. And I'm like, did I just hear that right? And I have to tell my assistant, hold all my calls, stop, I'm gone. And that's, when the phone rings and you're the chairman of the board, you got to act. Yeah. And that was the highest stakes ever. And I left that position. Ironically, I got termed off by my board, which I think is kind of funny, but I left knowing we had saved lives. Yeah. So that's an example you said of how do you measure things. Sure. But what's really interesting is there's a lot of metrics, as you pointed out. Yeah. And I consider myself a skilled and experienced philanthropist from having run a charity, but you guys taught me so much that I didn't know because I was taught with the old school metrics, which is, hey, let's measure how much money we've raised. And then when we've raised that money, let's measure how much of it's going to the mission. That's right. The proverbial charitable efficiency. Yeah. And then smart people like you and Noah said, hey, forget, wrestling in the mud over getting 88 cents on the dollar to the mission versus 90. Sure. Focus on impact, number one. And then number two, don't be shy to think big and maybe spend money to make a bigger event. Like, Absolutely. do you want to have 90% of a $25,000 event go to the mission? Sure. Or would you rather have 85% of a $300,000 event? Yeah. And it's funny, I just threw out 4 metrics, impact, charitable efficiency, how much money you raised, but and fulfillment. Of course. There's so many more. And when you focus on fulfillment, our important thing, which you guys are very good at, is being donor-centric, recognizing that they're a very important client of yours. And I remember back in the day, I remember meeting with a very visible household name who I was trying to get $1 million from, and I did. But I also remember getting sacks of change that was collected by a kindergarten class, doing an exercise to learn about philanthropy, and you get a 10-pound sack of change. And guess what? It's as important to thank those kindergartners as it is to the guy who signed the $1 million check. Right?
Like you're setting a baseline for the future. The idea of fulfillment, and I used fulfillment and joyfulness, and on the surface, it's hard to think about finding joy. And when you're combating something like veteran suicide and some very, very real sensitive issues, I think that it's important to remember that hopefully fulfillment is a byproduct of the work that you're doing, right? Like the clients and the donors and the philanthropists that we work with, almost never are they setting out to do something to make themselves feel good, right? Like that's not the inherent goal, but the byproduct many times outweighs much of what they ultimately do on the impact side. And that's okay. I think the point that I'm trying to make is the idea to me that you're not allowed to feel, for some reason, you're not allowed to feel good about the work that you're doing because it makes you somewhat like you're in some way not focusing all of your inherent energy on the task at hand. I don't believe in that model. I think that people do better when they're in the presence of joyfulness.
Well, I think I'm cut out of the same cloth as you there, Josh, because if you are making an impact, I don't know how you can't be fulfilled. Sure. It's the proverbial win-win. Yeah.
Maybe you're not satisfied, right?
Well,
that's okay. That means there's more to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the idea of not feeling fulfilled.
I don't know too many philanthropists who have philanthropied their way out of a job. Sure. Okay, we fixed childhood hunger. I'm going home now. So there's always more work to be done. But I like to think of it as a virtuous cycle, a virtuous feedback loop, where if you have a profound impact on a mission that's important to you, then fulfillment's a byproduct, and then repeat. You want to do it more. Sure. And and doing it more can be making a bigger commitment at the personal level, or it might be, casting a broader net. Here's another stupid pet trick. When people see you succeeding at something you're passionate about, where you're a volunteer, they look at you and say, wow, Josh is really, really good at, supporting Boy Scouts of America. Sure. He must be great at his day job. Sure. When they see you being good at something you're passionate about, the subliminal connection is, gosh darn it, he must be great at that other thing he does.
I want to talk about communication for a second, because communication is so key in both of our businesses, and it's key in marriages and parenting styles and all of these things. But I got to tell you, Rob, one of your absolute superpowers is how you communicate with others, whether it's on the phone or whether it's via email. By the way, you're the most prolific email writer that I've ever met. I've been copied on communications where you're either introducing a client or recommending us as a resource. But the way that you talk to your clients is incredibly intentional, right? You are detail oriented, and the way that you speak makes others feel like a better version of themselves.
Well, that's awfully kind of you. Thank you.
I'll share an example. One of the best compliments that I've ever received from in regards of one of my kids is that another parent, or actually a teacher, told me once that my son was the type of kid that made all the other kids feel better about themselves. And I see that value in you, and I want to know kind of where that came from, because that is, in my opinion, profound, and it's a differentiator, and it's something that you lead the path on.
Communication is really, really important because the opposite of communication is miscommunication or a failure to communicate. Yeah. And in my world, I'm entrusted with people's money.
Sure.
So it makes sense to me to make a little extra effort to communicate properly and be very clear. Way. Yeah, it's just about effort. And I'm a big believer in, trying to do 5 different things 10% better. If you're always trying to do things just a little bit better, the difference between good and great is sometimes just consistently doing a little bit more. John Wooden, who is one of my favorite role models, the famous coach of UCLA, excellence isn't an accident. No. It's a byproduct of a dedicated commitment to being better. And it's a behavioral pattern. Yeah. Kind of like overnight success it's a fallacy. Excellence is intentional. Yeah. It doesn't happen. There's a commitment to it. And the last thing I'll say, which by knowing me, is I'm a geek. Yeah. I love to read. I love to read. I love to learn. I love to write. Yeah. So I like making the extra effort to communicate clearly. And, I love it. And it was funny because while I was waiting to get started, I noticed Melissa has quite the bookshelf in her office. Sure. So I took the liberty of photographing each shelf because I want to start looking at some of those books. She has a fabulous collection of books.
She's a prolific reader.
I love to read. And what a great world when you can go to Amazon, push a button and have a book hit your electronic device 2 minutes later that's going to make you smarter or make you more interesting.
No excuses, right? It's not like it was hard to go. You didn't have to get in your car, drive to the bookstore.
Well, let me tell you what. The worst thing, my worst day that I have is if I get on an airplane and my devices run out of electrons and I can't charge them. Because if I'm on an airplane unable to read a book, I might as well be riding a bike to my destination. I have to read. I have to read. My wife thinks I'm a geek because I can't have idle time. I can't go to the beach and lie around all day. I got to read a book.
You're a person in motion. That's for sure, Rob.
Yeah.
And I'll agree with you, not in a bad way on the geeky side, but a little bit of inside baseball when we were kind of discussing what this would look like. You were the person who told me, Josh, I'm going to be the most amped up, excited, and well prepared person that you talk to on this. And I even kind of had to say well, Rob, hey, this is unscripted, man. We're just going to go at it. And you are maniacal about preparation and, and that's obviously suited you well in your career and your relationships for sure. I want to go back to one thing that you said because it deserves extra emphasis. And it's this idea of lifting up others, right? Which is so core to philanthropy, but so core to making people successful in whatever endeavors that they pursue. I personally don't know anyone who doesn't feel ready to take on the world when someone does something nice for them or makes them feel good about themselves. And sometimes philanthropy is, it's not this big secret. It can be as simple as, delivering a compliment, a smile. And how do you think about kind of the next generation and their ability, who maybe doesn't have $1 million to contribute to their favorite cause? But you kind of talked about the jar of pennies earlier, but how do you think about kind of preparing the next generation to take on these reins, which is so important? You and I are, hopefully on, we've reached the top part
of our guys with
gray
hair. Is that what you're trying to say?
Hey, I wasn't going to say that, my friend, but
hopefully the cameras aren't picking up the gray on the side. This is my good side.
Great lighting.
Well, we all have a choice. We have the ability to give time, the old time, talent, or treasure. Sure. If you're a wealthy person, you can write checks If you're an unemployed person, you can give your time.
Sure.
And if you're talented, you can give your expertise. So we can all choose something to give.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting with kids, because ultimately the most important job you and I have is that of parent.
Yeah.
And these damn kids are sponges. They see, granted, mine are out of the nest, and in grad school now.
So we've talked about it. You're a walking point for others.
A lot of my parenting is done. My kids are either going to succeed or fail, and some of my parenting is done. But they observe us from a very young age, and we have this responsibility as a parent, and we can teach them. And going back to what I said earlier, some of the things that are most important to teach them are empathy and compassion. Our kids aren't going to, brag, I hope not, about how much money mom or dad has. Yeah. But at some point in their lives, they're going to realize, hey, dad paid it forward, or mom did this, or mom did that. Yeah. My wife has been a good role model for me because she's a really good practitioner of trying to do something randomly kind once a day.
Man, I love
for someone. And it might be a stranger, but it's usually a friend. But just random acts of kindness are so gratifying.
Yeah.
And again, lifting people up is way more important than anything else. I mean, if this is a race, doing more to get ahead is great. You might win whatever race you're keeping score of by whatever scorecard, but a better metric is bringing people up around you. If you're winning and hitting on all cylinders, I think it's incumbent on you to give back and encourage and lift others.
My favorite thing is when I'm in a situation where you said you made comments about parenting, and it's funny because we never stop being a parent, right? But that said, my favorite thing when I learn something from my kids that's reflective of a value that we've instilled with them, because there's no greater compliment to have something told back to you, right? Because it means you're being heard. And the idea of being heard, I think, is inherent to success in navigating business, parenting, marriage. And we, like we mentioned before, we can go on and on. But the idea of being heard, I think, is enough for some people sometimes.
I made a mistake when I was in college, and I put myself in a bad position.
Okay.
I was a rugby player at Cal, and after we won the national championship, I was standing in close proximity to a couple of teammates who were doing something they shouldn't have been doing.
Sure.
And my coach saw that and immediately painted Rob with the same brush.
Yeah.
And I had to accept the consequences that I put myself in a bad place.
Yep.
And my coach, I don't think he ever forgave me. I never successfully explained my position.
Yeah.
And his attitude was, you put yourself in a bad place, Rob.
Sure.
And so I learned that there's consequences for putting yourself in a bad place.
Sure.
And fast forward about, maybe it was 7 or 8 years ago, my oldest daughter was volunteering at a human rights institute in Budapest, Hungary.
Wow.
Living by herself there. I don't know how she convinced my wife and I, hey, let's send our 17-year-old to live in Budapest by herself.
We talked about perspective.
I went to pick her up when she was done with her summer internship there, and we were driving together through Croatia, and she mentioned that she was in a position where, the proverbial fork in the road, she could make a good decision or a bad decision.
Sure.
And she had always remembered Dad talking about the consequences of putting himself in a bad place. And there were consequences.
Yeah.
She said, I made the right decision because I remembered what you told me about don't put yourself in a bad position. So then I wrote my rugby coach a beautiful long letter describing this. A beautiful long letter. Like you said, I like to write. Beautiful long letter describing this, and got no reply.
You know what, though? It's not about that sometimes. It's about the activity.
Yeah. The outcome was my daughter made a good decision when she could have made a bad decision. So that's more important than anything else.
Absolutely. That's enough for that activity right there. I want to go back kind of to that topic of what's next.
Okay.
Right? Wealth management, maybe the most competitive industry in the world, right? Or among the top, right? Fundraising is obviously another very competitive space, and ultimately has ties to philanthropy as well. But tell me about, now you mentioned experience, 27 years you've been at this, right?
Sure.
Tell me about something that often gets wrong about wealth management, and something that, looking to the future, you're very hopeful about in the wealth management space.
I don't like what I'm seeing in the world right now with this dreaded acronym, FOMO, fear of missing out.
Okay.
People are looking around and getting maniacally obsessed with other things around them.
Sure.
And, you've got FOMO, which is closely related to this other horrific emotion, which is envy.
Yeah.
And as people get fixated on others instead of their own journey, dangerous things can happen. And I remind people, hey, it's important to stick with what you know and stay with, your core expertise. Like I don't like it when, going back to what I said earlier, when, the dentist tells me he wants to, mine crypto. It's like, why don't you stick with dentistry? You're a pretty good dentist.
That's fair.
And so I have to combat that a lot.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where you get this immediate feedback right now. These silly devices that we have in our pocket ping us with information, and people's attention spans have gotten so short that, they want to do something today and get the benefit tomorrow. And they lose sight of the commitment and sacrifice that needs to be made. I battle people a lot on FOMO and envy. It's
love it.
You can't, call me up today and chase the stock that was up yesterday, after the fact. You gotta, don't be so responsive. You don't want to be, the fish that just strikes any, shiny lure.
I'm going to add that to my words of wisdom by Rob Wolford for sure. It's going into the file.
Okay.
Rob, as we wrap, we've been kind of ending these sessions with one theme. And I mentioned before, we're obviously sitting at a bar, and we've talked about how this is traditionally a place to foster open conversation and two friends talking about ways to change the world, right? I've been in an environment where, especially from an entrepreneur standpoint, we're sitting at a bar, sitting at a coffee shop, and some of the best ideas in the world come and they're jotted on the back of a bar napkin, right? Or grab something close to you. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to grab a bar napkin and jot down just a sentence or two. If you were to leave behind something for the next person in that chair, or Rob from 20 years ago, or the next generation who's going to be having a conversation like this. And I'm excited to see what you're going to write down, because I know it's going to be so rich in everything that we've talked about today. So I'm really excited to see that kind of come to fruition. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic. I'm smarter because of it.
Wait, the audience isn't going to find out what I put on the napkin, though.
Oh, they will. They will.
Okay.
Yeah, no, everybody's going to learn about it.
I was going to say.
No, it'll be there. It'll be there, but we have to have that as a teaser for people to at the end of the time. So
excellent.
Rob, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure having you on Distilling Philanthropy.
Thank you for having me.
All right,
My
sir.
pleasure.
You got it.
My thanks to Rob Wolford for joining me on this episode of Distilling Philanthropy. To learn more about Rob's work and how he thinks about wealth, family, and long-term decision-making, check out the show notes in the description. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.